When I married Josh 7 years ago, I thought I was stepping into a perfect life. He was my dream partner, kind, supportive, and funny, and his family seemed wonderful. At least, that's what I thought when I first met them. His parents welcomed me with open arms, but his younger sister, Amanda, was a different story. At first, I didn't notice anything strange about her behavior. She was polite, even warm, when Josh introduced us. She complimented my outfit, laughed at my jokes, and seemed genuinely happy to meet me. I later realized she was just sizing me up. Amanda has always had a controlling streak, especially when it comes to Josh. He's the older sibling, but she spent her entire life acting like she's the one in charge. Josh once told me how Amanda had a habit of inserting herself into his relationships. Before me, she tried to set him up with one of her friends, twice. The first time, when he was barely out of high school, he went along with it for a while just to keep the peace. The second time, he flat out refused, which led to a meltdown where Amanda accused him of not trusting her judgment. When Josh and I started dating, she was fine. Not overly friendly, but not openly hostile either. She made a point of asking me questions about myself, where I grew up, what my family was like. But there was something about the way she listened that felt off, like she was waiting for me to slip up. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was nervous and reading too much into things. Josh didn't seem concerned, so I pushed the feeling aside. The cracks started to show after a few months. Amanda had this habit of bringing up Josh's ex-girlfriends every time we were around her. "Oh, remember when you and Carly used to hike this trail? She was so into nature." Or, "Lila always made the best lasagna. Do you still have her recipe, Josh?" It was weird, but I figured she was just being nostalgic. Josh didn't seem to love it either. He'd laugh awkwardly or change the subject. Once, when she brought up a particularly old ex, he finally said, "Mandy, can we not do this? It's uncomfortable." She acted hurt, saying she was just reminiscing. It didn't stop there. Amanda started showing up uninvited to things Josh and I had planned. If we were going out for dinner, she'd suddenly text, asking if she could join. If we had a movie night, she called Josh, saying she was bored and wanted to hang out. Josh, being the sweet guy he is, didn't want to upset her, so he'd say yes most of the time. I didn't mind at first. It's his sister, after all, but it started to feel like she was deliberately inserting herself between us. The first real blow-up happened about a year into our relationship. Josh and I had decided to move in together, and Amanda lost it. She called Josh and told him it was too soon, and that he was making a mistake. When he brushed her off, she turned on me, telling me I wasn't good enough for her brother and that I was pressuring him. I tried to keep my cool, but her words cut deep. I told Josh what she'd said, and he confronted her. She denied everything, of course, claiming I must have misunderstood. It was the first time I saw how manipulative she could be. Things got worse after Josh proposed. His parents were thrilled, and most of his family was excited for us, but Amanda's reaction was strange. When we announced the engagement at a family dinner, she barely said a word. Everyone was clapping and congratulating us, but Amanda just sat there, staring at her plate. Later that night, she called Josh in tears, saying she felt betrayed because he didn't tell her about the proposal beforehand. She accused him of prioritizing me over her, saying she had always been his closest confidant. Josh was patient with her, but even he was getting frustrated. "Mandy, you're my sister, not my wife," he said. She hung up on him. From then on, Amanda's behavior toward me became openly hostile. She'd make little digs about my appearance, my career, even the way I decorated our apartment. If I posted a picture on Instagram, she'd find some way to criticize it, either directly or through Josh. Does Claire really need to post so many photos of herself? It's a little much, don't you think? Josh started defending me more and more, which only made Amanda angrier. She accused me of turning him against her, as if I were some kind of evil puppet master. By the time we started planning the wedding, Amanda was a full-blown nightmare. She insisted on being involved in every decision, even though I hadn't asked for her help. If I chose pastel flowers, she'd say they were boring. If I picked a modern venue, she'd call it cold. When she wasn't criticizing my choices, she was trying to undermine me in other ways. Once, She invited herself to a bridal shop appointment and spent the entire time saying things like, "That dress makes your hips look wide," or, "Josh would hate that style." I try to be patient for Josh's sake, but I finally hit my breaking point when Amanda overheard me talking to his mom about the centerpieces. She laughed and said, "Wow, Claire, no offense, but you have terrible taste. I don't know how Josh puts up with it." I snapped. I told her she wasn't welcome at the wedding if she couldn't stop tearing me down. She acted shocked, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Josh and his parents backed me up, but Amanda didn't apologize. Instead, she doubled down, calling Josh later that night and telling him I was unstable and dangerous. In the end, she sent me a half-hearted apology text, which I left on read. I didn't have the energy to deal with her anymore. She still came to the wedding, though, wearing a black gown with a dramatic veil, like she was mourning Josh's loss. She spent the entire night sulking and whispering to guests about how she'd lost her best friend. Eventually, Josh's parents asked her to leave. It was humiliating, but also a relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. After the wedding, I told Josh I didn't want Amanda around when we had kids. He agreed without hesitation. I thought that would be the end of it, but with Amanda, things are never that simple. After the wedding, things were quiet for a little while. Amanda didn't reach out much, and Josh and I were finally able to enjoy being newlyweds without her constant interference. It felt like a fresh start. We focused on our careers, took a long overdue vacation, and started talking about buying a house. I didn't realize just how much tension Amanda had been causing until it was gone. But, of course, Amanda wasn't gone for good. She popped back into our lives a few months later when we hosted a small dinner party for Josh's birthday. It was just family. His parents, a couple of cousins, and a few close friends. Amanda wasn't invited, which wasn't intentional. We just assumed she wouldn't want to come, given the way she behaved at the wedding. But somehow, she found out about the party anyway. We were halfway through dinner when she showed up at our door. Josh and I exchanged a look, both of us caught off guard. She stood there with a big smile, holding a gift bag like she'd been invited all along. "I couldn't miss my brother's birthday," she said brightly, brushing past us before we could say anything. The atmosphere shifted the moment she walked in. Josh's mom was clearly uncomfortable, and his dad gave me a sympathetic look as Amanda started making herself at home. She handed Josh the gift, a ridiculously expensive watch, and loudly declared that she'd spent weeks picking it out. It felt less like a present and more like a statement. "Look how much better I know Josh than anyone else." For most of the evening, she was on her best behavior. She laughed, chatted with the other guests, and even made a point of complimenting me on the food. I tried to relax, but something about her felt off, like she was trying too hard. Josh must have noticed too because he kept glancing at me, silently checking to make sure I was okay. Then, just as things were winding down, Amanda found her moment. Josh's mom had been telling a story about an old family friend who had gone through a nasty divorce. She mentioned how the wife had ended up taking half of everything after catching her husband cheating. Amanda cut her off mid-sentence, turning to Josh with an almost gleeful expression. "Did you and Claire sign a prenup?" she asked, as casually as if she were asking about the weather. The room went dead silent. Josh set down his drink and stared at her. "No, we didn't," he said evenly. "We didn't feel the need." "Why?" Amanda smirked, as if she'd been waiting for this. "Oh, no reason," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "I just think it's a little risky, you know? You never know what could happen." I couldn't keep quiet. "What exactly are you trying to say, Amanda?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. She shrugged, pretending to be confused. "Nothing. I'm just looking out for my brother. You know, in case things ever go south." Josh had had enough. He leaned forward, his tone firm. "Amanda, stop. This isn't appropriate." But she wasn't done. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. "I mean, Claire is always running around, going to the gym, carrying a change of clothes. Who knows where she's really going?" The accusation hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Josh slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. You don't get to come into our home and insult my wife. You need to leave." Amanda looked genuinely shocked. For the first time, her confidence faltered. "Josh, I was just joking," she said, her voice small. But he wasn't having it. "It wasn't a joke," he said coldly. "You've been trying to undermine Claire since the day I met her, and I'm done with it. You either respect her, or you stay out of our lives." The tension was unbearable as Amanda gathered her things and left, mumbling something about how we were overreacting. Josh's parents stayed behind after everyone else had gone, clearly upset. His mom apologized over and over, saying she couldn't believe Amanda would go that far. His dad just shook his head, muttering, "She's out of control." That night, Josh and I talked for hours. He admitted that he felt guilty for not cutting Amanda off sooner. "I wanted to believe she'd change," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But she just keeps getting worse." I told him it wasn't his fault, but I was relieved to see him finally drawing a line. For the first time, I felt like we were truly united against her. For months after that, Amanda was radio silent. No texts, no surprise visits, nothing. It was blissful. We moved into a new house, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe she was finally out of our lives. Then, one morning, everything changed. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails, when I saw a message from Amanda. The subject line read, "I need your help." Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was long, rambling, and filled with pleas for forgiveness. She claimed she was in the middle of a divorce, that her husband had left her with nothing, and that she had nowhere else to go. She begged me to let her stay with us, just for a little while, until she got back on her feet. I stared at the screen, torn between disbelief and anger. After everything she'd done, she had the audacity to ask for my help? I called Josh at work and told him about the email. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "We need to talk about this tonight." That evening, we sat down and went through the email together. Josh looked exhausted, like he already knew how this would end. "I don't want her here," he said finally, "but she's still my sister. If we don't help her, who will?" I felt a pang of guilt. As much as I hated Amanda, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was family. Reluctantly, I agreed to let her stay, but only under strict conditions. "If she crosses any lines, she's out," I told Josh. He nodded, but neither of us felt good about the decision. Deep down, I knew we were opening the door to chaos. Amanda arrived at our house 2 days later, dragging 2 oversized suitcases and wearing an expression that was equal parts sheepish and defiant. I couldn't tell if she was embarrassed about needing our help or if she thought she deserved it, but either way, I felt uneasy the moment she walked through the door. Josh greeted her with a polite but distant hug, while I gave her a simple nod and stepped aside to let her in. She immediately began talking about how her divorce was a nightmare, how her ex-husband was ruining her life, and how she had no one else to turn to. She didn't apologize for her past behavior, didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, she acted like we'd invited her out of kindness rather than because she'd begged. I bit my tongue and let her settle into the guest room, telling myself that this was temporary. For the first week, she was on her best behavior. She kept to herself most of the time, occasionally coming out to join us for dinner or watch a show in the living room. She didn't make any snide comments or try to stir up drama, which surprised me. For a brief moment, I wondered if the divorce had humbled her, if maybe she was finally ready to change. But then the cracks started to show. One evening, after we'd put Ethan to bed, Amanda came into the kitchen where Josh and I were cleaning up. She leaned against the counter, sipping a glass of wine, and casually mentioned that she'd seen me coming home late the other night. "Do you always go to the gym that late?" she asked, her tone light but pointed. I glanced at Josh, who had stopped drying a plate and was now staring at her. "I wasn't at the gym," I said carefully. "I was out running errands." Amanda raised an eyebrow, taking another sip of her wine. "Oh, errands. Got it." She didn't say anything else, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Josh stepped in before I could respond. "Amanda, don't start," he said firmly. "We're not doing this." She raised her hands in mock surrender. I didn't mean anything by it, just making conversation. But the smirk on her face said otherwise. That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Amanda found little ways to needle me, always under the guise of innocent questions or comments. If I mentioned a work project, she'd say something like, "Wow, you must be really busy. I hope you still have time for Ethan." If I dressed up to go out, she'd ask, "Big meeting? Or are you just feeling fancy?" It was subtle enough that I couldn't call her out without looking overly sensitive, but it was constant, and it was wearing me down. Josh noticed, of course. He'd pull me aside after her little digs, apologizing and asking if I wanted him to say something. But I told him to let it go. "She's trying to get a reaction," I said. "I'm not giving her one." Then, one night, she went too far. We were having dinner, just the three of us, when Josh's mom called. He stepped away from the table to take the call, leaving me alone with Amanda. She stared at me for a moment, twirling her fork in her pasta, before saying, "You know, I've been thinking about Ethan. He doesn't look much like Josh, does he?" The air seemed to leave the room. I stared at her, stunned. "Excuse me?" She shrugged, her expression so casual it felt like a slap. "I'm just saying, he's got such different features. It's interesting, that's all." I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the table. "You need to stop," I said, my voice low and steady. "Stop what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "I'm just making an observation. Don't take it personally." Josh walked back into the room at that exact moment, and I turned to him, my voice breaking. "Josh, your sister just implied that Ethan isn't your son." His face hardened, and he looked at Amanda like he couldn't believe what he just heard. "Mandy, what the hell is wrong with you?" Amanda opened her mouth to defend herself, but Josh wasn't interested. He pointed toward the door. "Get out. Now." She blinked, clearly shocked. "Josh, don't be ridiculous. I didn't mean anything by it." "Enough," he snapped. "You've been causing problems since the second you got here. I tried to help you, but you're making it impossible. Pack your stuff and leave." Amanda looked at me, then back at Josh, as if hoping one of us would change our minds. When neither of us did, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "I'll go. But don't come crying to me when this marriage falls apart." She stormed off to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. Josh and I sat in silence for a moment, both of us too stunned to speak. Finally, he reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have never let her stay here." I didn't have the energy to argue. I was too exhausted, too angry. All I could do was nod and hope this time. Amanda was really gone for good. Amanda was gone by the next morning. She left without saying goodbye, her departure marked only by the faint slam of the front door as she dragged her suitcases to a waiting cab. Josh didn't speak much about it. He spent the day quietly fixing things around the house, a clear sign that he was trying to process his frustration. I didn't press him. I was too relieved to have our home back to feel anything else. But Amanda wasn't done with us. A few days later, Josh got a call from their mother. She was in tears, saying Amanda had shown up at their house unannounced, claiming we'd thrown her out for no reason. "She said you were cruel to her." His mom sniffled over the phone. "That Claire's been hostile since the wedding, and that she didn't feel safe staying with you." Josh looked at me from across the room, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. I could hear his dad's voice in the background, muffled but unmistakably angry. "Dad's not buying it," Josh said after he hung up. "But Mom's upset. She thinks we should have been more patient with her." I felt my jaw clench. More patient? She practically called me a cheater. "Josh, what does she expect us to do? Just keep letting her walk all over us?" Josh sighed and sat down beside me. "I know. I told her everything. I explained what Amanda said about Ethan, how she's been stirring up drama since day one. Dad was furious, but Mom's struggling. She doesn't want to believe Amanda's that kind of person." I could understand his mom's position. No parent wants to admit their child is capable of being cruel, but it didn't make it any easier. Amanda's manipulation was a poison, and it had spread through their family for years. Josh's dad saw it clearly now, but his mom was still holding on to the hope that Amanda could change. For the next few weeks, Amanda's presence lingered like a bad memory. She called Josh's mom constantly, feeding her half-truths and playing the victim. I tried to stay out of it, But it was hard to ignore when Josh's mom would call, pleading with him to make things right with Amanda. "She's your sister," she'd say. "You're all she is right now." Josh's patience wore thinner with every conversation. "What am I supposed to do, Mom?" he asked during one particularly heated call. "She doesn't respect Claire. She doesn't respect me. She's never taken responsibility for anything in her life, and you expect us to just let her back in?" The tension in their family grew, and I hated seeing Josh caught in the middle. His dad eventually stepped in, telling Amanda to stop calling unless she was ready to apologize. It wasn't much, but it gave us a brief reprieve from the constant drama. Then, one evening, Josh came home with news I hadn't expected. "Amanda's been arrested," he said, dropping his bag on the kitchen counter. I froze, a plate in my hand. "What? For what?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Apparently, she got into a fight with her landlord. She hadn't been paying rent, and when he tried to evict her, she went off on him. She threw something at him, a vase or a lamp, I don't know, and he called the cops. She's being charged with assault." I stared at him, struggling to process what he was saying. "She assaulted her landlord? Are you serious?" Josh nodded, his expression grim. "Mom's beside herself. Dad told her not to bail Amanda out, but you know how she is. She's already trying to figure out how to help." I set the plate down, my appetite gone. What does Amanda expect? She's been spiraling for years, and no one's held her accountable. This was bound to happen eventually. Josh didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted. "I feel like I've done everything I can for her, but it's never enough. She destroys everything she touches." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not responsible for her, Josh. You've done more for her than anyone else would have. At some point, she has to figure things out on her own." Amanda spent the next 2 nights in jail before Josh's mom caved and paid her bail. She went straight back to their parents' house, where she alternated between sulking and throwing tantrums. Josh's dad called him a few days later, updating him on the situation. "She's impossible," he said. "She's angry at everyone but herself. I told her she's on her own now. I can't keep cleaning up her messes." Hearing that gave me a strange sense of relief. Amanda had always relied on her family to bail her out, emotionally, financially, in every way. For the first time, it felt like she might actually face the consequences of her actions. But just when I thought we might finally have some peace, Amanda found a way to drag us back into her chaos. One evening, Josh got a text from her, short and to the point. "I need to talk to you. It's about Claire." Josh didn't respond right away, but the message hung over us like a storm cloud. What could she possibly have to say about me now? I told Josh to ignore it, but I could see it eating at him. He hated loose ends, and Amanda always knew how to push his buttons. The next day, while I was at work, Josh decided to call her. When I came home, he looked more stressed than I'd ever seen him. "What did she say?" I asked, bracing myself. "She's threatening to tell Mom and Dad that you've been trying to turn me against her," he said. "She's claiming you've been manipulating me, and that's why I've been so distant with her." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Of course she is. She can't handle the fact that you're finally standing up to her, so she's blaming me." Classic Amanda. Josh nodded, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "She's desperate, Claire. She's losing control, and she's lashing out. I don't know what to do anymore." I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that Amanda's downward spiral was far from over, and we were still caught in the middle of it. Amanda's text and the subsequent phone call left a bitter taste in both of our mouths. I knew her threats were hollow, desperate attempts to maintain some kind of power over Josh, but that didn't make them any easier to deal with. It was exhausting to constantly be on guard, waiting for the next thing she might say or do to stir up trouble. I could see the toll it was taking on Josh. He tried to hide it, but the tension in his shoulders and the tiredness in his eyes gave him away. A week passed without any major incidents, though we both remained cautious. Josh's parents stopped bringing Amanda up as much, likely trying to avoid putting him in the middle of their own frustrations. His mom was still trying to help Amanda in small ways, dropping off groceries, checking in, but even she seemed to be losing patience. His dad, on the other hand, was done. Every time Amanda's name came up, he'd mutter something about letting her dig her own grave. Things came to a head during a family dinner at Josh's parents' house. We had reluctantly agreed to attend, hoping it would be a quiet evening with just his parents and a few close relatives. But when we arrived, Amanda was already there, sitting in the living room like she belonged. My stomach dropped the moment I saw her, but I forced myself to smile and act polite. Josh, however, was less subtle. His jaw tightened, and he gave her a curt nod before heading into the kitchen to greet his mom. Amanda, of course, wasted no time making things awkward. She greeted me with an exaggerated, saccharine smile, saying, "Claire, it's so good to see you. You look tired. Is everything okay?" I clenched my teeth, but didn't take the bait. "I'm fine, Amanda. Thanks for asking." She kept up the act throughout dinner, pretending to be sweet and charming while sneaking in little jabs whenever she could. "Wow, Claire, you've been married to Josh for how long now? 2 years? I guess that's longer than I expected." She laughed like it was a joke, but the sharpness in her tone was unmistakable. Josh's dad finally snapped about halfway through the meal. Amanda had been complaining about how unfair her landlord had been, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd been arrested for assaulting him. His dad slammed his fork down and glared at her. "Amanda, enough," he said firmly. "You need to stop blaming everyone else for your problems. Maybe if you spent less time stirring up drama and more time taking responsibility for your life, you wouldn't be in this mess." The room went silent. Amanda's face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize or back down. But instead, she turned her anger on me. "Oh, I see what this is," she spat, pointing her fork at me. "This is Claire's doing. She's turned everyone against me, hasn't she? She's been manipulating you all, feeding you lies about me to make herself look better." Josh stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "Amanda, stop," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Claire hasn't done anything to you. You're the one who's caused all of this. You've been lying, manipulating, and tearing people down for years, and now you're angry that no one's falling for it anymore." Amanda's eyes welled up with tears, but it was clear they weren't from genuine sadness. They were her usual weapon, an attempt to play the victim. "I can't believe you talk to me like this, Josh. I'm your sister. Family's supposed to stick together." Josh didn't waver. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated us. You've disrespected my wife, insulted our marriage, and tried to make me choose between you and Claire. I'm done, Amanda. Until you can take responsibility for your actions and actually change, I don't want you in my life." Amanda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The rest of the evening was tense but quiet. Josh's mom looked heartbroken, but even she didn't try to defend Amanda this time. His dad shook his head and muttered, "About damn time." That night, as we lay in bed, Josh looked over at me and sighed. "I feel like I just broke something that can't be fixed," he said quietly. I reached over and took his hand. "Maybe it can't be fixed," I said, "but that's not on you. You've given her chance after chance, and she's done nothing but hurt you and us. Sometimes, letting go is the best thing you can do." Josh nodded, though I could tell it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept. No matter how toxic Amanda was, she was still his sister. Cutting her out completely felt like a failure to him, even though it was the only way to protect our family. The next few weeks were surprisingly calm. Amanda didn't call or text, and her usual antics seemed to stop altogether. Josh and I tried to focus on rebuilding a sense of normalcy, spending more time with Ethan and preparing for the arrival of our second child. It felt like we were finally moving forward, free from the weight of Amanda's constant drama. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Amanda had always thrived on control, and losing her grip on Josh wouldn't sit well with her. I didn't know when or how, but I was certain she'd find a way to pull us back into her chaos. And I wasn't sure we were ready for whatever she had planned next. For weeks, Amanda stayed silent. No texts, no calls, no sudden appearances. It felt almost too good to be true, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was just waiting for the right moment to strike. Josh seemed cautiously optimistic, but I caught him checking his phone more often, like he was bracing for something. The moment finally came during a Sunday family lunch at Josh's parents' house. His mom had insisted we come over, saying she wanted to patch things up. I was hesitant, but Josh agreed, hoping his mom just wanted to clear the air after Amanda's last outburst. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. His mom was cooking, his dad was watching a game, and Ethan was playing in the backyard. I started to relax, thinking maybe this would actually be a calm, drama-free afternoon. Then Amanda walked in. She came through the back door like she'd been invited, carrying a box of cupcakes and smiling as if nothing had ever happened. Josh froze, his face darkening immediately. I felt my stomach drop. His mom looked nervous, but tried to play it off, saying, "Amanda just wanted to stop by for a little bit. I thought it might be good for all of us to talk." Josh turned to his mom, his voice low and tense. "We've already talked. Amanda has nothing to say that I haven't heard 100 times before." Amanda's smile didn't falter. She set the cupcakes on the counter and folded her arms, her eyes locked on me. "Actually, I do have something to say. To both of you." I didn't respond. Josh crossed his arms, clearly waiting for her to get to the point. Amanda took a deep breath, her expression shifting to one of forced sincerity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. "And I realize now that I've made mistakes. I was hurt and angry, and I took it out on you. On both of you. I just want a chance to make things right." The room was silent. Even Ethan, who had come inside to grab a toy, stopped in his tracks, sensing the tension. I glanced at Josh, who was staring at Amanda with a look of pure disbelief. "You want to make things right?" Josh said, his voice cold. "After everything you've done? You think you can just show up with cupcakes and an apology and expect us to forget all of it?" Amanda's face faltered for the briefest moment before she composed herself again. "I'm trying, Josh. I'm trying to take responsibility. I know I've been a bad sister. I know I've hurt Claire, but I want to fix it." Josh laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You don't want to fix anything. You just don't want to be cut off. You thrive on control, Amanda. You hate that you don't have it anymore." Her mask finally slipped. Her eyes narrowed, and the sweet tone vanished. "You're right. I hate it. I hate seeing you let her turn you into someone I don't even recognize. You've changed, Josh. You used to care about family, and now all you care about is her." My blood boiled, but before I could say anything, Josh stepped in front of me, his voice sharp and unyielding. "You don't get to talk about Claire like that. She's my wife. My family. The only reason I even gave you another chance was because I hoped you'd finally grow up. But you haven't, Amanda. You never will." Amanda's face turned red, a mix of anger and humiliation. "You'll regret this," she hissed, grabbing her box of cupcakes. "One day, you'll see what she's really like, and you'll wish you'd listened to me." Josh didn't flinch. "Goodbye, Amanda. Don't come back." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. His mom tried to apologize, but Josh wasn't interested. "Mom, I love you, but if you keep enabling her, we're going to have a problem. I'm done with Amanda, and you need to be too." The drive home was quiet. Josh's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. I reached over and placed my hand on his, and after a moment, he relaxed, exhaling deeply. "That's it," he said finally. "I'm done. She's out of our lives." And she was. Amanda tried calling Josh a few more times after that, but he blocked her number. She sent a few emails, but he deleted them without reading. His parents eventually stopped bringing her up, realizing she wasn't going to change. Months passed, and life finally felt normal. Our daughter was born healthy and beautiful, and Ethan adored being a big brother. Our home was filled with love and laughter, and Amanda became nothing more than a distant memory. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching Ethan play with his sister, Josh turned to me and said, "I never thought cutting someone out of my life would feel like this, like I can finally breathe again." I smiled and squeezed his hand. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. And we did.